Hi, and welcome to another segment on spiritual practices. Today I want to speak with you about the spiritual practice of practicing the presence of God. But before I do that, I want to share a psalm that was in my breviary this morning, Psalm 63, just the first portion. O God, you are my God, for you I long. For you my soul is thirsting. My body pines for you like a dry, weary land without water. So I gaze on you in the sanctuary to see your strength and your glory. For your love is better than life. My lips will speak your praise. So I will bless you all my life. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul shall be filled as with a banquet. My mouth shall praise you with joy. It's my prayer that as I share this, that all of us would be encouraged to draw closer to God, that in this time of COVID, as we're experimenting with different practices, we would find ways to seek God and find Him, and to find our desire for God growing. In this practice of the presence of God, we have help from a monk by the name of Brother Lawrence. But before I get to him, I want to just state where we've come from and where we're going with this practice. So a little while ago, I shared about the divine office, and that in the early church, most settled on a morning prayer time and an evening prayer time. And then as they were able, lay persons who were not monks, who were out of the monastery working during their day, they would try to observe various prayer hours throughout the day. This was one way where Christians learned to practice the command of 1 Thessalonians 5:17, which is to pray continually. Now, there's another way of doing this as well. It's to focus in the in-between times of the prayer hours. So the question is, what's happening to my soul? What's happening to my relationship with God between all the set times that I might observe in my day-to-day routine that are designated specifically for prayer? Because the goal is to pray continually. So I'm just recalling a scripture where the Apostle Paul says, we can look in the mirror and turn away and forget what we look like. That's someone who would read the scriptures but then leave and forget all about it and live a completely different way. So the goal is to become integrated persons who have, who have just allowed scripture to form them in such a way that they are the same whether they're sitting in prayer or whether they're visiting with their neighbor, whether they're laying down to sleep at night. There's a constancy. And one way of seeing that constancy is through prayer, through this notion that our whole lives, the early church, Evagrius, spoke about, our lives become a prayer. Our entire lives become a flame as one prayer before God. So this goal, to pray continually, we know that the discipline is necessary. We know that from the way that we raise our children. We know that from the way we learn how to be productive. We know that from the church's liturgy that is intended to form us and give us a structure that offers for us a discipline that if we enter into it, we can truly be formed as Christian disciples. And so I don't want to negate the importance of observing certain times of the day for prayer. However, I also want to point out that on occasion, these disciplines, these practices can actually hinder us in our walk with God and even in our sense of spiritual and emotional maturity, because what happens is we can cling on to these disciplines and think that if we just do this, we're going to, do the right thing, we're going to become good Christians, and we lock ourselves into these structures that actually end up hindering our full growth, and we end up turning to them as a kind of a false security. In addition, sometimes observing the normal practices that we're used to observing just isn't possible. So right now, Many of us are maybe used to going to the church on a Wednesday for morning prayer, say, or on a Sunday, probably most often for a Eucharistic liturgy. In the Anglican Church, in the Diocese of Calgary, we're not yet meeting as a community together in the churches. And so we can continue to look at how is this forming us? How can this discipline of abstinence actually create a greater fullness in our lives, a greater maturity, a greater longing for God? Sometimes also we're too sick to pray at our set times, or we're enduring great pain, or we're walking through seasons of grief where it's just practically impossible to open our mouths and to speak anything. And in times like that, we're forced into observing different ways of praying continually. And this, at those points, can be a gift. And so, in the 7th century, let's talk about Brother Lawrence and how he can help us along here in this desire to pray. He lived from 1611 to 1691, and he was a soldier, and then he was a servant. And it wasn't actually until his mid-50s where he decided to become a monk and devote the rest of his life until the age of 80. So about almost 30 years or so, he devoted to this very focused pursuit of God. And he prided himself in being a simple person. His job was kitchen duty, and he called himself the Lord of the Pots and Pans. His chief duty, though, according to him, was to seek God and nothing else. And so from him, we have this practice of practicing the presence of God. He never actually wrote a book. It was his abbot who collected his writings. And this teaching on the presence of God, he wrote someone saying, if I know that you're going to share this, then I'm not going to share it. I'm just sharing it for you. And so sometimes throughout history, we are gifted with these little treasures that weren't really meant to go much further, but they end up starting a tradition of Christian spirituality that enriches many. And so I want to read what he wrote to this person in a letter. And he said about all of these practices, many of which we're talking about, I have found in many books many different ways of going to God and many different practices in living the spiritual life. I began to see that this was only confusing me, as the only thing I was seeking was to become holy gods. And so I think Brother Lawrence reminds us of something here, because he was seeking a person. He was seeking to live a life of union with God. And I think sometimes, the whole idea of spiritual practices does us a disservice, because sometimes we can just completely miss the point. And we can forget that this prayer life is about a relationship. And so we can do things, we can observe practices, but are we really even talking to God? And so we can ask ourselves, what is our relationship with God actually like? And how do we enter more deeply into this relationship? Are the structures that we've created in our lives and that we observe, are they helping us to grow closer to God? And also, what would you really like to say to God, apart from the words that you're used to praying in other liturgical settings? What is the deepest desire of your heart? What is something that you would really like God to know and converse with him about? Or how would you like him to accompany you? And so the question is, how might you invite God more deeply into the simple activities of your life? The way that Brother Lawrence did this, and I can read another quote here from him, was not, yes, he was a monk, and so he had the structure of the prayer hours, but he always kind of had in focus this relationship that he was pursuing. He says, I make it my business only to persevere in God's holy presence, wherein I keep myself by a simple attention and a general fond regard for God, which I refer to as an actual presence of God, or put another way, a habitual, silent, and secret conversation of the soul with God. Now, for some of us who are maybe more left brain, who like kind of the structure, that can leave us feeling really insecure. Like, okay, so how do you continually turn your affection to God? But for some of us who are maybe more right brain, creative, more fluid in our thinking, big picture, we might actually find that really inviting. And so I think prayer brings kind of both aspects together, where, like I said, Brother Lawrence, he had the structure of a prayer life where he would show up. You just show up. Someone said 80% of life is just showing up. But he also had this ongoing longing, which he described as wanting to experience God at every moment of the day. And so what he has given us is, and Saint Benedict actually talks about this as well in the Rule of Saint Benedict, which was written 1,000 years prior to Brother Lawrence. But what he gifts us with is this idea of the sanctification of the ordinary. Our work, the simple things that we do, become sacramental because they become something through which we can actually experience the grace of God. And we come to learn that, in fact, there's not a very great difference at all between something we think that we're doing that's very holy and something that we're doing that is just very mundane, the ordinary, the doing the dishes, the taking out the garbage, the changing of the diaper, the answering the phone, the checking the mail. All of these things can actually become sacramental if we are doing them with an openness to an ongoing conversation with God, and to an openness to an ongoing desire to be addressed by God in that conversation. Just scrolling down here, I want to talk about specifically then what we can do. It's helpful to think about, okay, so how do I move on from here? What's something concrete that I can do to work on and to facilitate my desire of God and this conversation with God? How can we practice the presence of God? Is there a simple prayer, for example, as you go about an ordinary task? So maybe you can think about creating a prayer for when you garden, or when you take out the garbage, or when you do the dishes, or when you get ready in the morning, or when you check the mail. It's challenging, but I think it's worthwhile to think about the fact that God cares. If he cares about every hair on our head, and he cares about our lives more than he cares about the sparrow that he cares for, does he care about each moment of your day? Do you believe that God actually cares about every moment of your day? He cares about you more than any human person could ever care for you. He's your creator. And so you can think about how God's care is with you when you're going about every small undertaking that you might go about in your day-to-day life, just as much as he is with you when you're going back to the church and when we're coming back to celebrate the Eucharist together, which we're all looking forward to doing. So I want to close again with Psalm 63, a little portion of it, and also then just one more suggestion of something that can be done along the lines of praying continually between the set hours, prayer hours of the day. O God, you are my God, for you I long. For you my soul is thirsting. My body pines for you like a dry, weary land without water. So I gaze on you in the sanctuary to see your strength and your glory. For your love is better than life. My lips will speak your praise, so I will bless you all my life. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul shall be filled as with a banquet. My mouth shall praise you with joy. So one further thing that we can do is take a beautiful scripture reading like this, and if we don't feel like maybe writing a prayer, it seems like too tedious for every little task that we do, we can, from our prayer hours, from our meditation of scripture, say in the morning, we can take a phrase and we can try to repeat it throughout all the ordinary tasks that we do until we come to that place of prayer again, where we can pick another phrase from scripture as kind of fuel for the next period of tasks that we go through. So, oh God, you are my God, for you I long. Or just, I long for you, God. I long for you, God. And then when you're going through the tasks of your day and you want to bring your attention back to God, you can remember that simple phrase, I long for you, God. There's so much here. Your love is better than life. Maybe you want to pick that one. Or so I will bless you all my life. I will bless you all my life. So I'm just going to leave that with you to work with on your own. It's a privilege to get to share with you once again. And until we meet again, bye for now.